Welcome to Quantum Flux, the podcast of Nonlocal Science Fiction magazine and nonlocalsci-fi.com. I'm your host, the editor of Nonlocal Science Fiction, Dan Dombrowski. The first issue of Nonlocal Science Fiction officially hit stores on Saturday, March 14th. You can find it in ebook and print-on-demand form on nonlocalsci-fi.com and increasingly on major ebook retail sites like Amazon. Today, I'm talking with Dan Colton, author of A Thin Atmosphere, a space adventure serial. Chapter 1 of A Thin Atmosphere appears in issue number 1 of Nonlocal Science Fiction. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you, Daniel.
So let's start off by talking a little bit about A Thin Atmosphere. Without giving too much away, can you tell us a little bit about the story, the characters, the setting, things like that?
Yeah. Well, there's Jenny, and that's his last name, but it's mostly referred to as Jenny, and Derry Jenny, that's his first name. He's a pilot on Mars, basically, and he has a family, and he's called off of dinner one night with his family and onto a mission, and that's kind of where it starts.
Okay, yeah, and then things develop from there. Obviously, we don't want to get into too much and spoil the surprise of what happens in this first chapter. So what originally inspired you to write this story? Where did the idea come from?
Well, that's a good question, because it came from another book. It's actually a nonfiction book that I read called 1 Minute to Midnight. It's a book about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it had a lot to do with jets, basically, planes, surveillance planes, like the U-2 spy plane. For instance, there's a section devoted to a pilot of an American U-2 spy plane. It's a true story. They were running navigation surveillance over the North Pole and collecting atmospheric evidence of what type of nuclear bombs the Russians were using, and they were able to collect evidence from the air in the atmosphere. And they were flying high altitude surveillance planes called U-2, and they were secret planes at that point. And this man, during the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was flying over the North Pole to collect this evidence to see what kind of bombs the Russians were exploding in the atmosphere, because the Russians were also testing. He got lost because of the Aurora Borealis, and they navigated by the stars, and the Aurora Borealis, he couldn't navigate by the stars anymore, and he realized he came over land, and he turned on his radio, and he heard a Russian radio station coming. It was Russian folk music, and so he realized he was over Russian territory. I'm sorry, I'm probably going way too long in this one story, but it's so interesting to me, and the book is really good. 1 Minute to Midnight. It was awesome, and he was flying this plane, and there was a threat of being shot down by Russians and by Russian jets, and it was just so exciting. And reading the different accounts, it was just also exciting. It inspired me to write something, and the medium of sci-fi is pretty good to me. So
yeah, that was, I guess, what I was pretty curious about, because the first time I read this, I could see that it was kind of a retro take on the genre. It struck me very much as an old school space adventure. Buck Rogers with an iPhone. So why did you decide to? Was it just your own interest in the genre, or was there anything in particular that made you set this in a sci-fi universe?
Yeah, it's my interest in it, definitely. And when I was reading it, I was reading this book that really inspired me to write this first chapter. It seemed also futuristic to me, even though it happened in the 60s. And I could see how you could place this thing in the future and embellish on different facts. And just kind of make it much more thorough story, because you can use so many elements in sci-fi.
Yeah, no, definitely. It gives you a lot of room to expand with the technology and whatnot. Derry Jenny, your main character, he's clearly the focal point of this first chapter. Are we going to stay with him the entire time? Do you see future chapters taking on other viewpoints, or are we going to be seeing pretty much this entire story through the eyes of Lieutenant Commander Jenny?
Well, I think he's going to be a driving force to kind of push everything through, but at the same time, there are going to be a lot of things happening with people around him. The story could go anywhere. Powerful spaceships out there. So, and a lot of people elsewhere. So, be a driving force to help it all go forward, because he likes to think that he can always pull it through if you've just got a plan.
How much of this do you have planned out? I know that I've got at least a draft of the second chapter already on my end, but I'm sure you've worked on it quite a bit more since then. It's been a while since we talked about it. Do you have much more of it planned out? Do you know how long this is planned on becoming, or is this sort of you're just going to see how it goes?
Well, it could end in a variety of ways, and that's what's interesting about it. But as far as right now, the second chapter, I believe that you read that draft. It's a good thing to base what the second chapter will be, but I'm so interested in Derry's family and what happens to them, kind of evolving simultaneously along with with his own story, and I want to see them. I want to see them evolve alongside each other more in the second chapter.
Okay, so we will get back in touch with his wife and his son. The names are escaping me at the moment, but at the end of the first chapter, things are kind of left at a little bit of a cliffhanger. But so he does get back to his family, and that's the direction things are going to go. It's not like a lone commando, Black Hawk Down kind of situation. He is going to get back in touch with his family.
Well, like I said, I want them to evolve along with each other, and some situations they require a lot of time and effort for parties to meet back up. You know what I mean? But I like to think that family will persevere in this case, and that they'll find a way to meet back again, because it's definitely going to be on Derry's mind, and on his mind more than anything else, I'd say. So
sounds great. I look forward to reading. As you said, I've looked through the second chapter already. I'm sure that'll evolve a little bit as we work together on it, but I'm looking forward to reading the future chapters as well. So turning away from within atmosphere and getting more to the personal side of things, you're joining us from Rutland, Vermont today, but you're originally from Wisconsin, correct?
Yeah, I actually live in West Rutland, which is very close to Rutland, but yeah, West Rutland.
Okay, and you work for the local newspaper there in Rutland, right?
Yep. It's called the Rutland Herald.
And that's actually a position that whenever you and I first got in contact with each other back in October, when you first submitted the story to me, you were working, I think, for the Rutland Herald. You were working part-time, though, whereas now you have a staff position, right?
Yeah, I was a freelancer. So I was just getting paid by the story, basically. They would just send me a check for whatever amount of stories that I sent them in and that they used. And I think they used all the stories I sent in, which was pretty cool. Now,
growing up, did you always want to be a writer? Was that always your goal?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I wanted to be so many things growing up. But in high school, I was on the newspaper staff, and I mean, I read a lot. I think I always wrote, and I think I always did want to be a writer, but it just took a while for it to become immensely obvious.
Did you do well as a student? Were you good in English class?
Yeah, I was good and bad, I guess. Kind of dabbled in both. I was good. Good for a while. High school was crazy for me. A lot of things happened to me in high school. Mr. Soik, I think that was his name. Mr. Soik had a science fiction class, and yeah, I received an F, and then the following year or semester, I don't know, sometime following that, I wrote a story and gave it to another teacher I had, who was a philosophy teacher. I had him for a philosophy class, and which I also didn't do that well in the philosophy class, and there came a time of reckoning with that teacher as well. But I gave the teacher of my philosophy class a story I wrote, a fiction story I wrote, who read it, and then he showed it to my science fiction teacher who had failed me previously. And I was walking down the hallway one day, and the science fiction teacher came out and he said, "Dan, I read your story." And I was like, "Oh, great." He's like, "Yeah, whatever happened last time with the F, just that's behind us." I was like,
Did he wipe the F off your record, or?
No, absolutely not. That's why I was like, okay.
Oh, so he just wanted to make up with you personally. He didn't want you to have any hard feelings for getting an F, but he couldn't correct it after the fact.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the F that he gave me, I read the books, and I remember engaging in class. So
What kind of books were you reading in a high school sci-fi class? Just out of curiosity.
yeah, the book Rendezvous with Rama. Um, uh, do androids dream of electric sheep?
Ah, Philip K. Dick. Yeah, that's some heavy stuff for a high school class.
Well, yeah, I mean, he was kind of like sort of a heady teacher. I don't know, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I figure for a high school level class, they might start you off with some Arthur C. Clarke, some Asimov, something pretty classic, golden age. Philip K. Dick is a little out there to throw right at kids who've never read extensively in the genre before, and then expect them to be critical of it for a class.
I thought it was great because it was kind of a shorter book, and like and maybe it was because I just had read so many books before. I just went through it.
Sure. Oh,
That's,
it's a great read. It's one of my favorites. I can't even imagine trying to get through it back in high school.
okay. There was the book that we didn't read it. There was the book the Feed. Are you familiar with that book?
I don't. Do you know who wrote it?
I don't. I never actually read it, but that was the popular science fiction book that the class always read, but we just didn't read it when I took it.
Huh.
We read other work instead.
Yeah, I went off the top of my head. I don't happen to know that one. So you got through high school eventually. What did you go to? You go to college to study journalism originally, or did you have other thoughts at that point?
Well, I went to college and I studied just basically English, the literature, really. Undeclared major at that point. But I studied one of the most prevalent classes at that point was a horror literature class.
Okay, so you're reading lots of Stephen King and things like that, or more
Uh,
classics like Poe.
yeah, both. But in high school, I'd read a lot of Stephen King. Um, uh, you know, I read one of his more recent novels, Under the Dome. That was when I read that one. I read Salem's Lot, and I'm not going to be able to list all of them. Pet Cemetery.
I
Pet
can remember
Cemetery
reading that way
freaked me
back when. I think I
out.
might have read that one in grade school. My parents weren't watching too closely what I was taking out of the library at that point, I don't think. So, what did you see yourself doing after college originally with an English degree? What did you go in thinking you were going to be able to do? Did you have most kids don't go into college. I certainly didn't go into college with a plan. I studied anthropology thinking I was going to go be Indiana Jones or something like that. But did you have any idea of what kind of a more of a stable day job you were looking at going into college at all?
No, no. Coming out of college, I technically have not graduated with a bachelor's degree, even at this point, and I came to Vermont having I count my blessings. Let me tell you that. Um, I don't know like how I've ended up in the situation that I'm in now, but I feel very lucky to be able to to write for a paper and to have a farm and to write fiction and to just I don't know how this I feel very lucky to do it.
Sure, certainly. If I can ask, how exactly did you end up in Vermont? I know from previous conversations and emails and things that you sort of worked your way around different farms in Wisconsin after you left college. How did you end up over in Vermont after that?
I came to Vermont. Somebody with my girlfriend who had been in AmeriCorps, which is kind of like this service program, and so we hadn't been together for a while, and then she came back to Wisconsin, and we kind of we just got back together essentially, and decided that based on my previous experiences the year before and her desire to do something of a similar nature as what I'd done the year before, we looked around and decided there are opportunities that you can find on the internet. it's it's pretty crazy, and they're farms, and you can go be apprentice, and an apprentice had a farm, uh, and you live a lot of times you live at the farm, facilities at the farm, and we found a place. I still live there today. I'm renting here now, actually, but we found a place, a very great place, a very good place to live. Nice housing, everything. I worked very hard, and I don't think I would do it again. Um, just because of all the, like, weeding carrots for 7 hours a day. That's not that enjoyable. But anyways, I did it. I did it last summer, and at the end of it, the owner of the farm said you can have an acre of the farm here, and so I said, in agreement with my girlfriend, Kristen, who I came here with, we agreed to take the farm, the proposal, and we have a program with local hospitals at the moment they identify patients within their healthcare systems, outpatients who are coming in to visit different clinics or hospitals that could benefit from eating a more wholesome diet, meaning more vegetables, basically, more organic or organically grown produce. And so we're working with hospitals and basically selling prescription vegetables. And this all feeds me going into my journalism as well. Although I find myself quickly making a lot of people angry at me, which is like kind of freaky. The other day, I was at a crash scene. It was a terrible crash scene involving pedestrians. And I rushed there, and there's stretchers being pulled everywhere and people milling on the streets. And I'm trying to ask firemen, what's going on, and policemen, what's going on, and none of them are talking to me. They're going, get on the street, and yelling at me, and I'm like, this blows. and I'm looking, and they pulled a man from underneath a truck. It wasn't a mail truck, but it was a truck shaped like a mail truck, but it wasn't a USPS truck. Between the truck and a post, an electric post on the sidewalk, and they pulled this man out. And I'd been on the street, and an EMT rushed out and he said, "You got to move." And I moved onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't find anybody who would talk to me. So I go up to the guy who's sitting in the car who had smashed the guy into the pole. And I told him, I said to him, "Roll down your window." And he rolls down my window, and I said, "What happened? I'm from the Rutland Herald. What happened?" And he said, "Well, this lady blew through the red light and blah, blah, blah." And next thing I know, I feel these hands grabbing me, and they're pulling me backwards, and they're saying, "That's him, that's him." And I feel these guys push me out of the scene onto the sidewalk. And I look back, and it's these two cops, and they go, "If I see you here again, I'm going to throw you, I'm going to arrest you." And then they walk away, and it freaked me out.
Did you flash your press badge at him? I mean, you're allowed to do that sort of thing, I think, right?
Well,
or is it not for an active crime scene or an active incident like that?
At that point, I wasn't willing to put more confusion into an already chaotic scene where somebody's life was at risk. I saw this man being put onto a stretcher and pulled away, and his life was at risk. And I wasn't willing to make more confusion occur. And so I left.
So, I mean, it sounds like the journalism is pretty intense then. You told me in an email that you're working pretty much constantly. You've been going for more than a week straight, just doing work for the paper and not much else. Do you see yourself, and then also you're trying to cultivate this land that you're on. Where do you find time for everything? How are you able to find time to write, your articles for the paper, to work the farm, and to write fiction all at the same time?
You just do. I don't know. You just do.
You think journalism, do you think that's a good fit for you long term? I mean, like you said, you're getting into these pretty intense situations. Is that something you're just doing for the moment while you're developing your creative writing, or is it something you see yourself sticking with for a long time?
I see it all linked in together, to tell you the truth. One thing helps to stoke another thing.
So getting back to science fiction, and what are you reading at the moment? Anything good?
Presently I'm not. Actually, okay, yes. I haven't read it in like 5 days, but I'm reading Earth Abides. It's science. Well, yeah, it's science fiction. I would say it's science fiction. It's a. I haven't had that much time to read a whole lot lately. But it's a story. It's a post-apocalyptic story, and this strange disease kind of comes and wipes out almost all of humanity. And this guy in San Francisco, he's like a biology student in college who had been out in the wild, and he was bitten by a rattlesnake, and he got sick, and he thought he was going to die, and he comes back into town, and everyone's gone and dead, and it lapses quite a long period of time, and at this point he feels he's kind of like carrying the fire of society, like with him and this tribe that he's the leader of. It's pretty neat.
Obviously, you don't have a ton of time at the moment, but when you do you read science fiction generally, or do you read other things typically? Is science fiction sort of a happy diversion?
Well, a lot of it has a lot of science fiction in it, aspects of science fiction. For instance, you could argue Earth Abides is not science fiction. You could say that's ridiculous. It's not science fiction. It's a dystopia. In my opinion, I'm reading this, and all of these biological, a lot of medical and ecological circumstances arise that pertain to the story, and you realize that science has so much to do with this, because it's really a look at the world, and look at what would happen to the world if almost all of mankind just dropped dead. What would happen? What would occur? And that's kind of what it is. And it's centered, and that's centered and focused on one kind of person, but it expands to include all these people that kind of they evolve alongside him. But it's a story of one person having the fire to lead the way, but also feeding off of other people's energy, and so it's a great story. Of Earth Abides. It's the title says it all. I don't know.
You also mentioned at one point before that you're reading a lot of nonfiction at the moment. That's sort of where your attention gets drawn a lot of the time.
Absolutely. Right now, like literally sitting next to me is the Associated Press Guide to Good News Writing. It's called The Word, and I'll just read. Well, maybe I won't read it. I shouldn't get into it, but it's a really good book about writing and news writing, which is it's absolutely nonfiction. But other nonfiction books, Jared Diamond, the author Jared Diamond, he's written Guns, Germs, and Steel, Collapse. I think I've read all of his books, actually, maybe except for one. But he's a nonfiction. He's a scientist, UCLA, I believe, a professor of biology at UCLA, and he's written all these books. They're anthropological, and they're ecological, and they're chemistry. It's everything, and many of them focus on how society is currently structured and why it's structured the way it is. There's this fiction book. It's called Watership Down, and it's the story of rabbits, and it personifies rabbits, and it's like this tribe of rabbits that have to go out onto adventures, and it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. They're like hobbits in many ways, but it's so much of it has to do with ecology because they're rabbits, and so much of it has to do with biology because it's rabbits. That it's almost like reading a nonfiction book. You're learning so much when you're reading it, that it's a completely worthwhile read, even if it's lengthy at points and boring at points. It's just wonderful.
But speaking of ecology, and there's a long tradition of science fiction writers and looking at ecology and looking at the environment. Frank Herbert is known to have been influenced by a book by a woman named Rachel Carson. who was a naturalist or an ecologist back in the 60s. She was actually from Pittsburgh. I heard a lot about her when I was living down in Pittsburgh. But she wrote a book called Silent Spring, which is kind of seen as one of the roots of the modern environmentalism movement, because it's about looking at the environment in its totality and the effects that we have on one thing and how that can affect something else. And so in the Dune series, there is a lot of subtext about planetary ecology and looking at how actions can affect every living thing on a planet just by doing one thing. In Dune, they're exploiting a natural resource, and by exploiting that natural resource, the spice. They are upsetting the balance between the freemen, who have carved out this little niche for themselves in this harsh environment, and the sandworms, who are these giant life forms that are the real rulers of the planet. It's obviously classic, fantastic science fiction, but on some level, it's also an allegory for environmental balance and ecology and all that.
And if you think about it, the freemen were always in search of water.
Right, yeah, they would whenever one of their tribe mates died, they would dry him out and reclaim the water for the tribe, because the water didn't belong to the person, the water belonged to the tribe. What is revealed later, and this doesn't really ruin anything as far as the plot, this is just backstory and underlying things, but what you find out later, and this is 5 or 6 books in, and it does get a little dense by this point, is that the sandworms, and specifically their larvae, are actually aquaphobic. The reason that Dune is a desert is because of the sandworms. But so it's all about this balance, and if you want, and the worms are also the thing. The sandworms are also what make the spice that everybody's after. So you've got this world that's this really harsh desert, and in order for a lot of people to survive there, you need more water. But if you bring water to this planet, it's going to kill off the worms, and the worms are the ones making the spice, and the spice is what's valuable. So it's just this giant allegory about how humans coming in and making the environment the way they want it is going to throw off the balance and just destroy everything.
Yeah, well, I find that writing so much copy for newspaper as a reporter, that I think it's probably going to affect my fiction writing, to tell you the truth, in many ways. And it's going to kind of reshape the mold that I had previously established, which included a lot of news writing type copy, but now it's so much more prolific. It's so much more pronounced in the amount of writing that I do, which is a lot more writing than I'd ever done before.
Definitely, yeah, and certainly it always helps to get different perspectives and different styles under your belt, and I can see journalism being a huge just a huge help to you, just in terms of developing your voice, and not even just in developing your voice, but also in learning to write quickly and efficiently. And
yeah, oh gosh, yeah, that's so true. I mean, that's unbelievably true. Wow. I covered a story recently about, there's a resort town called Killington in the mountains where people go to ski, and there was a fire at these townhouses. Luckily nobody died, but I was the only reporter there the day it happened, and it was nuts. The amount of places I had to drive to and people I had to try to talk to get the complete story. Writing under deadline, having to go talk to people, having to find people to track down, and getting the right quotes, and then writing a story.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one nice thing about fiction is you don't have to worry about misquoting somebody. I can imagine that's a little nerve-wracking with journalism, making sure you're always getting stuff right.
Well, the thing that hits me as the most difficult aspect of it is just keeping up with the pace sometimes, because you have 2 stories on your plate for the day. It's like, and 2 stories, they're like 500 word stories, as opposed to something, 500 word stories is kind of standard in the daily town paper sort of thing. So it's like 500 words. You have to aim for that. 2 stories. And then all of a sudden you hear on the police scanner, major structure fire. send all available municipal fire departments that can answer the call at all. And you're like, well, this is clearly a big deal. And you have to put all that on hold and go to this fire that's potentially like half an hour away. Come back, write a complete story on that, and then finish your other stories. So it's just an immense, but it's exciting. But that's what makes it exciting too. Like this could potentially sound like a big, like I'm just complaining, but it's actually what makes it exciting.
No, it sounds great to me. I'm the kind of person that I like to sort of just go with the flow, and you know, I like having projects that I can come back to, but at the same time, I like having a million different things to work on so that when I get bored with one thing, I can go do something else, which is why this whole magazine project has been great for me. There's so many different aspects to it.
So for you and I, fiction writing is awesome because they're so connected to everything else that we're focused on. That's what it feels like to me. Maybe I'm projecting. I don't know.
No, it's definitely great. It's been a fun time for me to get to this point. I'm really hoping that, you know, in the next month or two it'll take hold and I'll have a reason to put out the second issue as opposed to, you know, just putting it out because it's time to put it out, you know. Well, thanks for being here today, Dan. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you.
Once again, I've been talking with Dan Colton, author of A Thin Atmosphere. The first chapter of Dan's story appears in issue number 1 of Nonlocal Science Fiction, available now on nonlocalsci-fi.com. Next week on Quantum Flux, I'll be talking to Aaron Hamilton, the author of the short story Catalyst. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you happen to find it so that you never miss an episode.